She needs to learn her place. Those words came out of my son-in-law's mouth like he was commenting on the weather. Calm, certain. And my daughter sat there at that dinner table with her eyes fixed on her plate, as if she'd heard those words before, as if she'd learned to disappear inside herself whenever he spoke. That was the moment I understood everything, and they had absolutely no idea who they were sitting across from. My name is Beatrice Holloway. I am 63 years old. For 31 years, I worked as a forensic psychologist specializing in domestic abuse cases, first as a court-appointed evaluator in Chicago, then as a consultant for the Cook County State's Attorney's Office. I have sat across from hundreds of abusers in clinical settings. I have written the reports that sent them to prison. I have testified in trials where defense attorneys tried to dismantle my credibility word by word, and not one of them ever succeeded. I have seen violence wearing every costume, charm, money, religion, grief. But nothing, not one single case in 3 decades, prepared me for the night I watched it, wearing my son-in-law's face. This is the story I have never told anyone completely. Not my colleagues, not my oldest friends, not even my sister Gwendolyn, who has known me since we were girls sharing a bedroom in Memphis. I am telling it now because someone needs to hear it. Because somewhere right now, a woman is sitting at a dinner table just like my daughter was, and she doesn't yet have the words for what is happening to her. Let me take you back to the night of November the 14th. It was a Thursday. My daughter Nadine had asked me to come for what she called a family dinner. Just the 4 of us, her husband Cresswell, his mother Faye, and me. I remember thinking it was a strange combination. Nadine and I had always been close, the kind of close that comes from it being just the 2 of us for most of her life. Her father, my husband Raymond, passed away from a stroke 8 years ago, just 3 weeks after celebrating his 61st birthday. We had been married 34 years. His absence left a shape in every room of my life that I still sometimes reach for without thinking. I drove to their house in Evanston that evening with a peach cobbler Raymond's mother had taught me to make. Nadine loved it. She had called me twice that week, both times saying she just wanted to hear my voice. I should have asked more questions. I know that now. But there is a particular kind of willful blindness that comes with loving someone. You accept the explanations that hurt you least. When I arrived, the house felt off. That's the only word I have for it. The table was set beautifully. Real cloth napkins, the good candle holders Nadine had received as a wedding gift. But Nadine herself was moving through the kitchen like a woman trying not to spill something. Quick, contained gestures. A smile that appeared on her face a half-second too late whenever she looked at me. Faye was already seated at the table when I came in. She was 68, a retired real estate attorney from Indianapolis, a woman who wore her accomplishments the way some women wear perfume. You noticed it before you noticed anything else. She had always been perfectly cordial to me in that specific way that means nothing. The way you are cordial to someone you have already decided doesn't matter. "Beatrice," she said, "how nice that you could make it." As if I had been invited to a committee meeting. Cresswell came out of the living room to shake my hand. He was 38, 11 years older than Nadine. A corporate litigator who had, in 4 years of marriage, never once made my daughter laugh in front of me. He was handsome in an exhausting way, the kind of man who always seemed to be performing composure. He thanked me for coming, said the cobbler smelled wonderful, guided me toward my seat at the table with his hand barely not touching my shoulder. The dinner started quietly. Faye talked about a property she had consulted on in Naperville. Cresswell talked about a case he couldn't discuss but clearly wanted credit for anyway. Nadine served the food. She had made pot roast, green beans, cornbread from scratch. She had spent hours on that meal, and not one person at that table said a word about it. I watched my daughter refill Cresswell's water glass before her own. I watched her wait for him to take the first bite before she picked up her fork. I watched Faye glance at Nadine's blouse and then look away without expression, the kind of look that delivers a verdict and moves on. I'm a forensic psychologist. I spent 31 years being paid to read rooms, and that room was telling me something I didn't want to hear. It happened near the end of the meal. Nadine was passing the cornbread, and as she set the basket down, a small piece crumbled off and landed on the tablecloth near Cresswell's plate. Nothing. A crumb. The kind of thing that happens at every dinner table in America every single night. Cresswell looked at it. Then he looked at Nadine. He set his fork down the way you set something down when you want the sound to mean something. Really, he said. Nadine said she was sorry. She needs to learn her place, he said then, and he looked at his mother when he said it, and his mother tilted her head the way you do when someone says something you find reasonable. The table went silent. I have been in rooms where confessions were made. I have been in rooms where men described acts of violence with the same flat effect they'd use to describe taking out the trash. I have trained myself over decades to remain regulated when everything in my body wants to react. That training is the only reason I did not stand up from that table in the first 10 seconds. Instead, I set my own fork down. I looked at my daughter, and I saw it in the way she had already pulled her shoulders in, already made herself smaller, already started to apologize with her posture for something that was not her fault. That was the moment I understood that this was not the first time. I said nothing. I sat with that knowledge for the rest of the dinner, the way you sit with the diagnosis you've just received in a doctor's office, present in your body, processing in your mind, working out what comes next. When I left that night, I hugged Nadine at the door. I held on a few seconds longer than usual. She whispered, "I'm fine, Mom." The same 3 words she had been saying on the phone for 2 years. Driving home on the expressway, I did something I had not done since Raymond died. I talked to him out loud in the car. I told him what I had seen. I asked him what to do. The highway was dark and the radio was off, and he didn't answer, of course, but I knew. I already knew. I need to tell you who Nadine was before all of this, because when you love someone, you owe them the full picture. Nadine was born on a Tuesday in August, the hottest summer Chicago had seen in 20 years. Raymond was so nervous in the delivery room that he knocked over a tray of instruments and spent the next 10 minutes apologizing to the nurse instead of looking at his daughter. When I finally got him to hold her, he stood completely still for almost a minute, just looking at her face, and then he turned to me and said, "Bea, I don't know what I did right, but whatever it was, thank you." She grew up in our house in Hyde Park with too many books and not enough patience for television. She was the kind of child who took things apart to see how they worked and didn't always put them back together, which Raymond found hilarious and which made me quietly move anything valuable to higher shelves. By the time she was 12, she had decided she wanted to be an architect. By the time she was 16, she had designed a theoretical addition to our kitchen on graph paper that was, I later admitted to Raymond, genuinely good. She graduated from the University of Illinois with a degree in architecture, then got her master's from IIT. She was 26 when she started at a small firm in the West Loop doing commercial interiors. She was good at it, not just technically, but in the way she listened to people, the way she understood what they were trying to build and helped them build it. Her clients trusted her. Her colleagues liked her. She came home for Sunday dinners and called me on Tuesday evenings and laughed, truly laughed, at her father's old jokes, even when she'd heard them 30 times. She met Cresswell at a fundraising event for a legal aid organization. He was presenting. He was polished and confident, and he looked at her across the room in that way that some men have, the way that feels like being chosen. She called me that night. "Mom," she said, "I met someone. It's different. He actually listened to me talk about a project for 20 minutes and asked real questions." I remember feeling the thing every mother feels, the bittersweet pull of your child moving towards someone else's orbit. I wanted to be happy for her. I was happy for her. But I also noticed, even in that first phone call, that she talked more about how he made her feel seen than about anything specific he had said or done. That is a small thing. I filed it away and said nothing. Raymond met him 4 months later, before the stroke. He shook Cresswell's hand, and afterward, when we were alone in the kitchen, he said to me quietly, "He's very sure of himself." That was all. Raymond was not a man who spoke badly of people, but he was a man who chose his words carefully. I understood what he meant. After Raymond died, I watched Cresswell become more present in Nadine's life. Not out of love for her, I came to understand, but because grief makes people vulnerable, and vulnerability is a resource for certain kinds of people. He was there constantly, solving things, managing things, being indispensable. Nadine leaned on him. Of course she did. She was 25 and she had just lost her father. They were married 2 years after Raymond passed. I stood at the front of that church in my blue dress, and I smiled, and I told myself I was projecting. I told myself that 31 years of evaluating abusers had made me see patterns where there were none. I told myself my daughter was happy. The first sign I dismissed came 6 months after the wedding. Nadine stopped joining our Tuesday phone calls without explanation. They just stopped happening, and when I asked, she said she'd been busy, that Cresswell kept later hours now, and she liked to be available when he got home. I heard the sentence she didn't say underneath that one. He prefers it this way. I said nothing. The second sign I dismissed came a year in. She stopped coming to my book club's holiday party, which she had attended every year since college because she genuinely liked the women there. Cresswell has something that night. I stopped asking after that. The third sign I should not have dismissed was 2 Christmases ago, when I noticed she had stopped wearing her hair the way she'd worn it her whole adult life. Natural, loose, and was wearing it pressed and pinned back in a style I'd never seen her choose for herself. When I asked, she said she just felt like a change. Her eyes didn't match her voice. After the dinner in Evanston, I did not sleep. I lay in my bed in the dark, and I did what I had done professionally for 3 decades. I assembled the evidence. The weight loss I'd been attributing to stress. The way she positioned herself slightly behind him in photographs. The 2 occasions in the past year where she had cancelled plans with me hours before with thin explanations. The voice that had been getting quieter, year by year, like a radio turned down so gradually you don't notice, until the room is almost silent. I was not speculating. I was not projecting. I was a trained professional who had been too close to the subject to see clearly. And I had just been given a direct observation that cut through every rationalization I had allowed myself. I called Nadine the next morning. She answered on the second ring, her voice careful. "Last night," I said. "Are you safe?" Silence, not the silence of confusion, the silence of someone deciding how much to say. "Mum, don't." Nadine. "I'm fine. It was nothing." He was tired. Faye brings out the worst in him sometimes. Faye seemed to agree with what he said. More silence. "Baby," I said, and my voice broke on that word in a way I hadn't planned. "How long?" She didn't answer that question. She said she had a meeting, that she would call me later, that I shouldn't worry. She did not call me later. But that night, at 11:45, I received a text from a number I didn't recognize. It said, "He went through my phone. Please don't try to reach me for a few days. I love you." I sat with that text for a long time. Then I went to my desk and I opened a notebook, and I started writing down everything I had observed over 4 years. Every cancelled dinner, every change in her appearance, every phone call where something sounded wrong under the surface of the words. I dated every entry I could remember. I wrote for 2 hours. Then I made a list of everyone I knew. I want to be clear about something. I did not become a forensic psychologist by being reckless. The opposite. I became one because I understand that timing matters more than intention, that a move made too early destroys the outcome you were trying to create. I did not call the police that night. I did not confront Cresswell. I did not do any of the things that might have felt satisfying in the moment and would have made everything harder. I called my colleague Reginald instead. Reginald had been a family court judge in Cook County for 22 years before his retirement, and he was the person who had recruited me to the state's attorney's consulting work in 1998. We had worked 100 cases together. He answered on the third ring at midnight without complaint because we had that kind of friendship. "Reg," I said, "I need your guidance. My daughter's husband." He was quiet for a moment. "Then talk to me." I talked to him for an hour. He listened. He asked exactly the right questions in exactly the right order. At the end he said, "Bae, you know what this is." I said I did. He said, "Then you know this isn't a situation you manage. This is a situation you document, build, and execute when you have enough ground under you that they can't pull it out." I knew that. I'd told it to other people's families 100 times. It sounds different when it's yours. Over the next 3 weeks, I gathered. I reached out to Nadine's college roommate, a woman named Abby, who had been her closest friend until she quietly disappeared from Nadine's life about 2 years into the marriage. Abby cried on the phone. She said Cresswell had told Nadine that Abby was a bad influence, that she encouraged recklessness, that real friends don't lead married women toward that kind of behavior. Abby had no idea what behavior he meant. She had never done anything except be Nadine's friend. She said, "I've been waiting for someone to call me about this." I spoke with 2 of Nadine's former colleagues from the architecture firm. Both of them, independently, told me she had left the firm about 18 months ago and that they had been confused by it. She was on a clear trajectory there, had just been promoted, and then she had resigned abruptly with a vague explanation about wanting to do independent contract work. One of them said, "I reached out twice after she left. She was always very kind, but she said she was busy. The third time I didn't reach out again." He had dismantled her career, her friendships, her routines, one piece at a time, so gradually that each individual piece could be explained as her choice. I contacted the state's attorney's office. I had a relationship there. My consulting work had run long enough that I knew several prosecutors personally. I spoke with one of them, a woman named Cora Simmons, who had worked domestic violence cases for 15 years. I presented what I had as a professional would present it, not as a frightened mother, but as a forensic evaluator describing a pattern. Cora listened. She asked about direct evidence of physical harm. I told her what I had directly observed and what I had been told by Nadine in her text. Cora said, "B, keep building. If and when she's ready to talk, you need to be able to show her that you have a foundation, not just anger, a foundation." That was the word I held on to, foundation. What I hadn't anticipated was Faye. I knew Faye was dangerous in the abstract way. You know that certain things are dangerous before you've touched them. But I hadn't fully understood the architecture of it until I spoke with a woman named Beverly at my church, who had been in Faye's neighborhood book club for 4 years before the pandemic. Beverly said to me over coffee one afternoon, not knowing why I was really asking, "You know, I always felt a little sorry for her son. She ran that house like a corporate merger. Everything had conditions." I asked her what she meant. He tried to date a woman a few years back, a nice woman, a nurse, and Faye made the girl's life so difficult that the relationship collapsed inside of 8 months, and Faye never did anything you could point to directly, nothing you could call out. She just made the girl feel like she was never quite right for the position. The position. That word stayed with me. And then came the call I hadn't expected. It was a Wednesday morning, 5 weeks after the dinner. I was in my kitchen with my second cup of coffee when my phone rang. A number I didn't know. A 317 area code, Indianapolis. I answered. "Dr. Holloway?" A man's voice, older, a little uncertain. "My name is Franklin. I was married to Faye Darden for 11 years. I believe my son Cresswell is your son-in-law." I set my coffee down. He had been looking for someone to call for over a year, he said. He had left the marriage when Cresswell was 9, and it had cost him almost everything. Faye had controlled the finances, the social relationships, the narrative afterward. He had been the bad father who abandoned his family. That was the story. He had spent years trying to maintain a relationship with Cresswell despite it, and it had never fully taken. And now he believed he understood why. She taught him how to keep a woman, Franklin said, not how to love one. She taught him that a wife is something you manage. I know because she taught me the same way before I finally got out. He said he had heard, through a distant family connection, that there were concerns about Cresswell's marriage. He didn't know the details. He said he had been sitting with the question of whether to call for 2 weeks. He said he was sorry it had taken him this long. I asked him if he would be willing to speak with a family advocate formally, someone with legal standing who could take a proper account of his observations. He said yes, without hesitation. I called Reginald back that night. I want to tell you about the conversation I had with Nadine before any of this came to a head, because it was the most important one. She had reached out to me carefully through a series of texts over several days, short and infrequent, always while Cresswell was at his office. She told me she was not okay. She said it simply, without drama, the way you admit something you've been refusing to say out loud. She said she had been not okay for a long time. She said the worst part was not the things he did. It was the feeling that she had imagined it somehow, that she was too sensitive, that a woman with her education and her profession should be able to handle whatever was happening without falling apart. "Mum," she texted, "you defend people for a living and you couldn't see it happening to me. Doesn't that mean something? Doesn't that mean maybe I'm exaggerating?" I sat with that text for a long time before I answered it. I thought about what I would say to a client who said those words to me. I thought about what Raymond would say. Then I called her. Cresswell was in a deposition all afternoon and she had 3 hours. "Listen to me," I said when she answered. "The fact that I missed it, that doesn't mean it isn't real. That means he is very good at what he does. It means I was too close. It means I loved you too much to let myself see something that would require me to act. That is my failure, not yours. And it does not make what you have experienced anything less than what it is." She was quiet. "Nadine, I need to ask you something, and I need you to answer me honestly. Has he ever—" "Yes," she said, before I finished the sentence. The silence between us after that lasted maybe 10 seconds. It felt like a year. "Okay," I said, "and I meant it the way you mean it when you were done asking questions and ready to act." I told her what I had built over the past 5 weeks. I told her about Abby and about her former colleagues, and about Franklin and about Cora Simmons at the state's attorney's office. I told her I had documentation going back 4 years. I told her that she had options that she could not yet see, but that I could see clearly, and that I was not going anywhere, and that when she was ready, not before, but when she was ready, we would move together. She cried on the phone that day for a long time. She asked me why I hadn't pushed harder before. I told her the truth. I was afraid that pushing too hard would push her away from me and further toward him. She said, "I almost went back to Abby on my own 3 times, and every time I thought about it, I heard his voice in my head saying she was bad for me." I said, "I know, that's how it works." She said, "How do you know when to stop believing the voice in your head that belongs to someone else?" I said, "When you hear your own voice again underneath it." She called me back 4 days later. She said she was ready. What followed was not a single dramatic moment. It was a series of careful, documented steps. The kind of work I'd helped other families do for decades, now turned inward. Cora Simmons met with Nadine formally. Franklin gave a recorded statement. Nadine's medical records, 2 emergency room visits in the past year, documented as accidents, the kind of accidents that happen in patterns, were subpoenaed as part of a formal investigation. Cresswell's attorney called me personally. He was smooth and precise, and he told me that Cresswell was prepared to contest every allegation, that he had witnesses who would speak to Nadine's instability, that a prolonged legal battle would be damaging for everyone. I listened to the whole speech. Then I said, "Counselor, I have been building this case for 6 weeks with the same rigor I applied to 31 years of professional forensic work. If your client would like to contest it in court, I would genuinely welcome that opportunity." He called back 3 days later to discuss terms. Faye called me once. Just once. She was controlled on the phone, measured, the way she always was. She said this was a private family matter and that I was inserting myself where I didn't belong. I said, "Faye, you sat at a dinner table and nodded when your son told your daughter-in-law she needed to learn her place. You made that my business." She said she had only been trying to support her son. I said, "I know. That's the problem." She hung up, and I let her. I want to tell you about the afternoon Nadine moved out because it was not what I expected. I thought there would be relief in it, or triumph, or at least a clean feeling of a long chapter ending. Instead, Nadine stood in the middle of her living room with 3 boxes around her feet, and she looked at the walls and she said, "I designed the layout of this room. Did you know that? I spent 2 weekends on the furniture placement. I was proud of it." She wasn't saying she wanted to stay. She was doing what survivors do. She was grieving the life that should have been lived in that space. "Tell me about the design," I said. So she told me. Standing in that room she was leaving, she talked for 10 minutes about light angles and traffic flow and why she had chosen an open plan despite Cresswell's preference for compartmentalization. And somewhere in the middle of it, the grief shifted. I watched her face change. She was remembering that she was someone who thought about light and space and how people moved through the world. She was remembering herself. We took the boxes and we left. The legal proceedings took 8 months. Cresswell's family had resources and they used them, which I had expected. What they had not expected was that I had spent 3 decades in court-adjacent work and that Reginald knew every procedural vulnerability in Cook County Family Court, and that Cora Simmons was the kind of prosecutor who treated a good case the way a surgeon treats a complex operation, with total focus and no shortcuts. Cresswell received a 2-year suspended sentence, a permanent protective order, mandatory psychological evaluation and treatment, and was ordered to pay restitution. His law license was referred for disciplinary review by the Illinois Attorney Registration and Disciplinary Commission. The review found sufficient cause for a 6-month suspension. Faye received no criminal charges. There was not enough direct evidence for that, but the proceedings had made public what she had spent years keeping private, and the social accounting for that, in the circles she moved in, was something she could not manage away. I did not feel satisfaction about that part. I felt something quieter, a kind of balance restored. Franklin reached out to Nadine after it was over. He sent a letter, handwritten, 3 pages long. She called me after she read it. She said, "He knew what she was. He's been carrying that for 30 years. I said, "Some people need a reason to stop carrying it alone." She said, "Should I write back?" I said that was entirely her choice, and I meant it. She wrote back, "It has been 2 years since the day Nadine moved those boxes out of that house in Evanston. She has her own apartment now in Lincoln Square, North Side, 3rd floor, beautiful afternoon light." She went back to the firm, not the one she had left, a different one, smaller, where she had worked on 2 projects that I have no technical ability to evaluate, but that her colleagues apparently consider significant. She called me on a Tuesday night for the first time in a long time, and we talked for an hour about nothing in particular, and I sat there in my kitchen with the phone against my ear, thinking about Raymond, thinking about how he used to say that the measure of a life isn't the hard parts. It's what you do with yourself in the long silences after. She is dating someone now, a landscape architect she met at a professional conference, a quiet man named, well, she tells me he asks her what she thinks before he offers his own opinion, and that he suggested she call me when he noticed she hadn't in a few days. I told her that was a good sign. She laughed. A real laugh, the one I remembered. I still work, consulting part-time now. After the case became somewhat known in professional circles, these things move through networks. I received 3 calls from colleagues in similar situations, trying to help their own families from the vantage point of professional knowledge and personal terror. I told all 3 of them the same thing Reginald told me. Document, build, move when you have ground under you, and do not let the professional knowledge become a reason to wait too long. We sometimes think expertise insulates us. It doesn't. It just means we understand what we're seeing. What we do with that understanding is still a choice. There is one more thing I want to tell you. About a week after Nadine moved out, I was in my house in Hyde Park, sitting in the chair Raymond used to sit in when he read in the evenings. I had a cup of tea and the window was open and the neighborhood was doing what it does in the evening in November. Quiet, cold, particular. And I thought about all the dinners I had sat through over 4 years, all the small wrong notes I had filed away and not acted on. I thought about Raymond saying he's very sure of himself, and me choosing to hear it as a neutral observation instead of what it was. There is a version of this story where I moved sooner, where I pushed harder at the first cancellation, the first changed phone call, the first quietly pinned back hairstyle. Maybe Nadine would have been angry with me. Maybe she would have pulled away further. I don't know. I made the choices I made, and I have to live with the shape of them. But I also know this. The night of that dinner, the tablecloth, the crumb, the words said out loud in front of me, that was the moment the story changed. Not because I made a phone call, but because I finally stopped waiting for different evidence. I had all the evidence I needed. I had had it for years. I just had to choose to see it clearly. If you are listening to this and you recognize something in yourself, in your daughter, in a woman you love, I am not going to tell you it's simple. It isn't. I'm not going to tell you the path forward is obvious. It isn't. But I will tell you this, as someone who has spent her life in rooms with both the people who cause this harm and the people who survive it. The harm does not become less real because it is slow. The wound does not become smaller because it has been carefully hidden. And the person on the other side of it, your daughter, your sister, yourself, she is still there, underneath the quietness and the careful posture and the eyes that don't match the voice. She is still there. And she is worth every single thing it costs to reach her. I think about that dinner table a lot. The cloth napkins, the good candle holders, the crumb that fell and changed everything. People ask me sometimes, colleagues, friends who heard pieces of the story, whether I feel like I won, and I never know quite how to answer that, because winning implies a game, and what happened to my daughter was not a game, it was a slow erosion. The kind that doesn't announce itself, the kind that looks from the outside like a series of small, reasonable choices. What I know is this. The harm Criswell did not go unanswered. Not because I am powerful, not because I had the right connections, but because I refused to let what I knew stay quiet inside me any longer. That is the thing about truth. It doesn't require permission to exist. It only requires someone willing to carry it forward instead of setting it down for the sake of comfort. Faye spent her life believing that managing people was the same as loving them. She taught her son the same lesson, and that lesson moved through one generation into the next, like water finding the lowest point in a floor, following the path of least resistance, collecting in the places that were never properly sealed. When I sat across from her at that table, I was not just looking at a difficult mother-in-law. I was looking at the origin of the damage, the place where the pattern was first written. Understanding that didn't make me feel sorry for Criswell. He was a grown man who made choices, but it helped me understand that what I was dealing with was not simply cruelty, it was inheritance. And inherited harm, if it is not interrupted, moves forward. I interrupted it. That is what I want you to take from this, if you take anything. Not that you need a professional background to protect someone you love. Not that you need connections or credentials or 30 years of court-adjacent work. What you need is the willingness to trust what you already know, even when trusting it costs something. I delayed for years because I was afraid of being wrong, afraid of pushing Nadine away, afraid of the discomfort of seeing clearly. That delay was its own kind of harm, and I have to live with that. But I also know what changed everything. Not a dramatic confrontation, not a single phone call. What changed everything was the decision to be honest, with myself first, then with my daughter, to look at what was in front of me and call it what it was. That kind of honesty takes something from you. It requires that you be willing to act on what you see, and acting on it means accepting the cost, the fractured relationships, the long legal months, the nights where the outcome was genuinely uncertain. Nadine found her way back to herself. Not because I rescued her, I want to be clear about that. She made every hard choice herself in the end. What I did was make sure she had a foundation to stand on when she was ready. That is what love actually looks like in those situations. Not solving it for someone, building the ground under them so that when they find their own footing it holds. Raymond used to say that the measure of a person is not what they do when things are easy. It's what they do in the long, quiet stretches when nobody is watching and the right thing is inconvenient. I didn't always get that right during the years Nadine was in that marriage, but I got it right when it mattered most. And I think I have to believe that is enough to build the rest on.